little while back, I reviewed a game called Vomitoreum by a developer named Scumhead, and despite some inherent flaws the game had, it was overall a really enjoyable experience. Since then, I've decided to take it upon myself and play through the developer's catalog to see what else they have on offer. Feel free to go back and watch the video I did on Vomitoreum if you're interested, but next up on the list is the Shrine games, Shrine 1 and 2. A pair of quirky little games in the Doom engine about a skinless red dude named Tusk who runs around killing eldritch abominations with an arsenal of weird bioweapons that would put David Cronenberg to shame.
Long live the new Fletch.
Each game has its own set of unique level design and enemies to keep you hooked. Oh, and did I mention that they're both free? Both Shrine 1 and 2 are available to download for free right now. All you have to do is add them to your Steam library and you can enjoy some Lovecraftian style carnage. Now, initially I planned on splitting this video in half so I could dedicate each half to both games in the series, but that was until I actually got around to playing Shrine 2 and realizing just how amazing it actually is. And before we get started, I feel it's necessary to mention this before going more into depth, as the first game really can't hold a candle to its sequel. I'll go more in depth on just how good it is later on in the video, but look, if you decide to turn off the video early, it's cool, no hard feelings, but trust me when I say you owe it to yourself to go ahead and play Shrine 2, even if you skip the first one. You really don't even need to play it to understand the second. So even if you decide you don't like my videos and want to tune out, at least do yourself a favor and head on over to Shrine 2's Steam page, as it might just be one of the best Doom mods ever made. However, before we get into all that, I still want to give Shrine 1 its due diligence, at least briefly. The first game starts you off with no cutscenes or lore explanations or any other of that bullshit. You just get dropped into a cave system and given a pistol, and you're expected to do what Doom players do best.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Right off, the game's art style is probably the first thing you're going to notice. Shrine 1 came out a couple of years before Vomitoreum, but it's not hard to see how the developer's art style has carried across multiple games, with all of the textures and enemy designs being simultaneously grotesque, yet kind of cartoonish at the same time. Although, this game leans a bit more into the classic retro pixel art direction than the last game, with all the environments being in 3D with 2D sprite work. And I have to say, a lot of the environments here feel very video gamey. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but you can tell that some of the levels were cobbled together just for the sake of it. Like, there's this one level here that's just a classic retro castle area. We have to collect a bunch of keys in order to progress, and the look of the environment almost feels something out of like a Legend of Zelda game or something. Most of these maps are also pretty short, with a good chunk of them able to be beaten in under 2 or 3 minutes. Hell, there were even a couple levels that I beat in under 30 seconds. There are some standouts here though, and I particularly like this one level where you're trapped inside what I think is supposed to be the guts of some giant demon, and all the walls are made up to look like little bits of intestines and other bodily organs, as well as some doors that I think are just straight up supposed to be the demon's asshole. All of the enemies here are more or less just reskins of the standard Doom enemies, just with their sprite work and animations redone to fit more of an eldritch theme, and you'll quickly notice your usual imps, cacodemons, and barons roaming around. Still, all of the designs look pretty good for what they are, and they make for a nice change to the typical Doom lineup. I thought the designs and animations for this giant knight dude were pretty cool in particular. You're also given a pretty decent spread of weapons here to gun down your foes, with all of them being these kind of living demonic bioweapons, similar to something like the guns in Scorn. You start off with your basic janky Doom pistol that you really only use until you get something better. I do like the sound it makes though. You also get access to this game's version of the chainsaw in the form of an arm-mounted bone spear. Then you'll quickly get your hands on a shotgun that's decent enough and does okay damage, but is quickly overshadowed by the classic Doom super shotgun, which for some reason is the only normal-looking weapon in the entire game, but it's also easily the best. The Gatling gun is here as well, but this thing is pretty shit because there's this weird spin-down animation whenever you stop shooting that makes the weapon extremely annoying to use because you have to pause for a couple of seconds before you can start shooting again. Next up is a grenade launcher that shoots unborn embryos that bounce around the environment and explode whenever they hit an enemy. The damage is decently high, but for some reason I can't aim this thing to save my life, and I definitely prefer the standard Doom rocket launcher over this. Then you have this game's version of the plasma rifle in the form of this alien gun that shoots out a beam of high damage energy, but chews through ammo like nobody's business, with your character only being able to fire it for a couple of seconds before you run out. And finally, you get a powerful flamethrower thing in the form of this little dragon guy that you carry around, and this thing uses up about 200 rounds of ammunition per burst, but is able to tear through most of the tougher enemies in one go. Speaking of which, the enemies in this game suffer from the same problem Vomitoreum had, where the power scaling just feels super off. Like, the enemies in this game soak up way too many hits before going down, the worst example of this easily being the Baron type enemies, who eat up like half your shotgun ammo before finally going down. Even something like the Cacodemons just soak up so much damage before they die that you're constantly having to find ammo pickups in between enemy encounters. The final boss in particular took me so many tries because I was forced to dump all my ammo for every single one of my guns to take him out, and he also had this really annoying homing attack that would literally follow you around the arena indefinitely until it finally hits something, and it also pretty much kills you in one hit. Overall, the whole game feels more like a proof of concept for the developers' later games than an actual full-fledged game, and it only took me the better part of an hour and a half to actually finish it all the way through. All said and done though, this is still a fun little Doom mod that's decent enough to play through, if only for the novelty alone. Plus it's literally free, so you've got nothing to lose other than your own time, and there's plenty of worse ways to spend an afternoon. But onto the second game, and I was immediately blown away by the step up in quality from the first. I'll be honest, I didn't have high hopes going into Shrine 2 after playing the first game, but the sequel is definitely an improvement in pretty much every way. In fact, no exaggeration, this might legitimately be one of the best Doom mods I've ever played. The amount of detail and attention that went into this game is insane. This game is entirely in a league of its own compared to the ocean of Doom mods that are out there. I honestly have no idea how this game is free, as I would easily shell out 15 or 20 bucks for this game in a heartbeat. Gameplay is super tight and responsive, all of the enemy designs are fantastic, and the levels are some of the best I've seen in this kind of game. And I mean, comparing this game to the first one is like trying to compare a Ferrari to a bicycle. For starters, the whole thing just looks a hell of a lot better, with all of the textures and sprite work looking much sharper and more stylized than the first game. There's 30 some odd levels on offer here, and unlike the previous game, each of them feels unique and all have fairly decent length compared to the first. You do see the return of some environments from Shrine 1 with things like a forest level, snow level, and of course a Lovecrafty and horror dimension, but there's a ton of new areas here too, like an underground mine filled with lava, an ice cavern, and there's even a few levels set in this Victorian cityscape that kind of reminds me a lot of something like Yarnum from Bloodborne. The creature designs have also been given a fresh coat of paint here, and there's honestly a lot of cool looking enemies on offer here. They all feel fairly unique and well thought out instead of just being reskins of your typical Doom enemies like the first game. Hell, I was shocked when I killed a group of these zombie type enemies in the first area, only for them to get up a little while later to keep attacking me without their heads. Besides them, you'll be fighting fallen angels, giant floating mouths, grotesque butchers, and strange floating hangmen type things, among a variety of others. The weapons have also been totally overhauled too, and now all have their own unique mechanics and alternative fires. Not to mention, there's also a shitload of them this time around, with the game having close to about a dozen weapons for you to play around with. For melee, the Bone Spear makes its return from the first game, and this time it's been reworked to have some actual slashing animations, along with a thrust that you can use to navigate the game's levels. You also come across a Molten Axe later on that regenerates ammo and lets you shoot out a wave of fireballs. There's also grenades this time around, with your standard pod grenade as well as a frag grenade that's handy for taking out larger groups of enemies. There's a crossbow that lets you freeze monsters before smashing them into pieces, a blaster shotgun with barrels that can either be fired quickly or all at once for more damage, also you can dual wield them, and a railgun that lets you charge up a powerful beam of blood. You also find a machine gun pretty early on that fires a swarm of bugs with an alternate fire that allows you to shoot homing bullets that can be pretty useful for hitting hidden enemies around blind corners. However, my favorite weapons are probably the cross that lets you fire waves of holy energy at demons, and the grenade launcher which absolutely tears through enemy health bars and is borderline necessary for some of the fights in the game. The game also adds the ability to inspect your weapons before using them to learn what they do, which is a pretty handy touch and honestly something I think should be added to a lot more games like this. You also get to use a handful of usable items similar to how you do in Duke Nukem, with things like a speed boost, the ability to freeze time for a few seconds, a boost to your overall damage, and one that lets you fly around the map, and easily the best out of all of them is an item that upgrades the abilities of all your weapons for a short time. This item can turn your Molten Axe into a flamethrower, or your railgun into an energy beam that fires consistent bursts of damage, and even lets you turn your grenade launcher into a literal nuke. The game also actually has a story this time around. After killing the Demon King in Shrine 1, Tusk got captured and put in prison with no way out. You start off in your cell just sort of pondering the decisions that led you here, before somebody drops you a way out from a hole in the ceiling, just like Oscar did in Dark Souls 1. You grab the Bone Spear given to you by the stranger and set about making your jailbreak. You fight your way through the prison compound, fighting your way through hordes of enemies and eventually breaking free to go off in search of the source of all these eldritch abominations. The layouts of these levels are really done as well, with all of the environments feeling a lot less linear than the first, and the added enemy variety makes combat encounters feel a lot more satisfying to play through. As you make your way through a forest environment in the game, you're immediately struck by just how good this game looks. I'm sure we've all paid a hell of a lot more money for games with budgets equivalent to the GDP of a small country that still don't look half as good as this game does. I mean, seriously, this game is just oozing with so much style and character that it's hard to believe that it's entirely free and more or less made by a solo developer. Even the animations for things like throwing grenades or shooting your weapons just look so incredibly high quality. After you get through the forest area, you go through some catacombs before you eventually come across your first boss encounter. And if you watch my video on Vomitoreum, you'll know that one of my biggest complaints about the game was that the boss encounters were all a little off in terms of power scaling, with each fight boiling down to just circle strafing around the arena and spamming left click. Well, thankfully, none of those issues are present in this game, with each of the boss fights feeling well crafted and pretty fun in their own right. And this first fight sees Tusk up against this weird flesh pipe organ surrounded by a set of eyes that all need to be destroyed in order to open the boss's weak spot. Do this 3 times and the boss will go down and you'll be able to finally escape the prison complex and move on to the rest of the game. So you head through a portal and get transported into this dream dimension where you have to hop across platforms with your bone spear before coming back out into the forest and coming across an enemy that is literally just the Siren Head creepypasta, complete with all of the same sound effects and tall, lanky look.
I'm over here stroking my dick. I got lotion on my dick.
And these things are also legitimately harder than most of the boss fights in the game. They've got super high health pools and fire out these waves of homing projectiles similar to the Demon King in the first game, although this time around their attacks definitely feel a lot less bullshit than in Shrine 1. After dumping enough shots into it and taking it down, you come out into the game's snow area and are forced to navigate across these frozen bridges and icy water, and you can even use your crossbow here to create platforms of ice on the water to let you get across, a mechanic that would once again make an appearance in the developer's later work. The snow biome eventually leads you into a mine shaft filled with molten lava and plenty of enemies. There's even a secret here that required you to jump into a pool of lava and quickly grab an item before you grenade jumped out, which leads me to mention that the secrets in Shrine 2 all feel like a perfect mix of being well hidden while also being accessible to the player. There's plenty of secret walls to find here, but they're all pretty obvious and they really only require you to pay attention a little bit. This is great because there's nothing I hate more in Doom games than when they force the player to just spam interact on every single wall in order to find some obtuse secret on a level where all the textures look the same. But anyways, the mine section ends with this giant arena fight against all the enemies you've encountered so far throughout the game, after which you're led into another boss fight with this horrible fallen angel type enemy. This fight can be pretty tough, with the angel flying around the arena and firing projectiles at you while also sending out waves of lightning across the arena floor. Even after killing him, he fakes you out with a power-up before transforming into his second phase, which gives him increased speed and damage. Eventually though, he goes down and you get to move on to my favorite area of the game, which sees you in the Victorian city area I mentioned earlier. And I wasn't kidding when I said this whole area really reminded me a lot of something straight out of Bloodborne, with cramped cobblestone streets and burning crosses all over the place. There's even a part where you have to fight a bunch of enemies surrounding a burning effigy that reminds me a lot of the opening area in Yharnam. Unfortunately though, you don't get to spend a lot of time here before you're thrown into yet another boss fight, this time against the Horseman. The Horseman himself isn't too dangerous, but he can perform an attack that summons a massive amount of enemies into the arena that will quickly overwhelm you if you're not careful. And once he starts summoning them, it's pretty difficult to keep track of things as he doesn't pause between spawning more adds, so they're constantly swarming the arena and just decimating you. You can stun lock him though, and if you can prevent him from summoning his minions long enough, he'll usually go down without too much trouble. After this, you'll get to fight through a gladiator-style arena before entering a castle and finding the final weapon of the game, the Hound Staff. Basically, it's a staff that lets you summon these cute little dog guys. It's pretty useless for combat, if I'm being honest, but you can pet the dog, which is always nice. Now, after this point is where the game starts getting real weird and leans more into the weird cosmic horror elements, so buckle up. After beating the castle, you enter this room floating in the void and full of angels, I guess. After that, you've got to navigate your way through a hedge maze, collecting a bunch of keys in order to get into the library, which takes you to the second to last boss fight in the game, Ophanim. I don't have much to say about this one. He's basically just a biblically accurate angel, and for some reason his attacks didn't really hit me, so I just lasered the shit out of him until eventually he went down. Moving on. So now that he's dead, you've got to make your way through the bowels of hell to stop the hordes of demons once and for all. You have to make your way through both the realms of lust and gluttony here, and both of these environments just look fantastic and are the most reminiscent of a typical Doom game. However, I can't really show much of lust because a lot of the textures in this level are made of, well, lady parts, to put it politely. Still, the levels are both really fun to play through, and you get to meet up with your old friend from the first game, the Barons, who are just as annoying this time around as they were before, which is wonderful. Afterwards, we get to take a trip through a Dark Souls classic, the Poison Swamp, and it's at this point where I start to come across what is really my only issue with Shrine 2, which is the lack of ammo pickups. See, from here until pretty much the end of the game, I am constantly in a state of little to no ammo. Like, seriously, for some reason, the closer you get to the end of the game, the less and less ammo spawns until you are literally hoarding every single bullet you come across and desperately trying to melee every enemy you can just to save shots. Thank God that the Molten Axe recharges its own ammo, because it was pretty much the only way I was able to make it through the game, but this resulted in me using the axe to take out a few enemies before then being forced to run off into a corner and hide while it recharged so I could get back into the fighting. And on top of that, the health pickups become just as scarce as the ammo pickups do. So basically, you're left with no choice but to die over and over again, or reload an earlier save and just hoard as much ammo as you possibly can. Which is a shame, since by the end of the game, you should be gunning down everything in sight, not hiding in a corner like a coward. I play all of my Doom games on ultraviolence, so maybe the ammo is a bit more plentiful on lower difficulties, but I still see no reason why the game is so stingy with the pickups, and it's a tarnish on what is otherwise a near perfect game. But anyways, you make your way through the swamp and kill a bunch of demons hiding out in a church, probably doing some evil ritual stuff, before heading into another layer of hell where you have to go through a gimmick boss fight that requires you to keep 4 friendly barons alive so they can take out the big demon in the center. It's essentially just a horde mode where you need to run out the timer while surviving the constantly spawning waves of enemies. It's a decent enough challenge and a good change of pace from the other fights in the game. After that, you take a portal into what is probably the most interesting level in the game. It's this weird void realm made up of all these mismatched textures and objects from all the other levels in the game. It kind of reminds me of Archon Grid, the last level in Cruelty Squad, for any of you that have played that game. Which reminds me that I really should get around to making a video about Cruelty Squad. The gravity in this area is different from the rest of the game, and you'll float around between playing cards and platforms full of demons as you try to make your way towards the end. You'll have to fly through gravity wells that make you heavier or lighter, and you'll get blown around by fans that try to send you careening off towards your death. When you finally do get to the end, you need to use your bone spear to dash through the final gravity well before you land on a chessboard that forces you to face off against various demons acting as chess pieces. And again, I was super low on ammo by this point and died more than a few times trying to beat this part. Afterwards, you head through a spiral tunnel and come out into a carnival of all things, full of various rides and games, and of course the usual slew of enemies. There's also what I think is supposed to be like one of those funhouse mirror mazes, but the whole place is just dark. Then you gotta hop onto a moving train and fight your way towards the end of the tracks, just like the train level in Blood. At the end of the fight, you have to go through a performance being put on by some of the demons, and there are little to no ammo pickups anywhere on this level. So by the time I got here, I was extremely low on health and had pretty much no ammo whatsoever. And it took me so many tries to get through this, and I tried every strategy I could think of to get through it. But I just kept dying over and over again because I just didn't have any bullets to kill enemies with, until eventually I made it out by just hiding in the back of the theater and popping out every couple of seconds to take a pot shot at the demons, until eventually I managed to kill enough to open the door to the level's end. After that, you're almost to the end, and you find yourself on the beaches of Innsmouth, and you need to make an ice bridge to the coast and fight your way through all the eldritch beasts blocking your path, past fish huts and skeletal trees, until eventually you get to the end of the level where you're faced with 3 of those Siren Head enemies. And at this point, I had just had enough of wasting my ammo on these guys. So thankfully, this is one of the few encounters in the game that you can just fully run past, so I'm not ashamed to say I took the easy route here. After that, you come into the final boss fight, Azathoth, a multi-stage boss fight across several dimensions and 4 different phases, and I'm not gonna lie, this fight is tough. His first phase is just him bouncing around doing karate moves, but in the second phase, he goes absolutely insane and reflects all of your attacks back at you, all while doing insane like curb stomp wombo combos on your ass. Even with using all of my items and tossing a shitload of nukes at him, I still died so many times on this fight. A couple of times I got him to his third phase where he fights you in this open water arena and spams projectiles at you, and this one was at least easy to laser him down in, but in his fourth phase he turns into this giant morel mushroom and just starts throwing out a ton of homing projectiles that are impossible to dodge. I could not beat this fight no matter how hard I tried. Every time I would try and laser him down, he would do all of his attacks at once and just turn my computer into a Microsoft PowerPoint. Eventually though, I just got lucky with lobbing nukes at him for the 40th time and he finally died, bringing you to the end screen of the game and giving our boy Tusk a much needed rest. So overall, I think this is easily one of the best Doom mods I've ever played. Hell, it might even be the best. There's just so much love and care put into this game, and it really feels unlike any other Doom mod I've ever played. And once again, it's completely 100% free on Steam right now. So go download it and give it a shot. Up next, I'm hoping to cover another one of Scumhead's games, Thorn. So if that's something you're interested in, consider subscribing and maybe dropping me a like or a comment down below to let me know what you think. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.